I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And Julia Phillips, it is always really good to see your face. And now we get to talk about Bear, your new novel. And of course, we're going to be spoiler free. Disappearing Earth was a finalist for the National Book Award, and it was a Discover Great New Writers pick back in the day. And if you haven't read Disappearing Earth, well, we're going to bring that into the conversation too, but also spoiler free because it's new to someone somewhere. Julia, I am so happy to see you. How are things?
I'm so happy to see you, and things are wonderful now that I get to talk to you. This is so fantastic to be here.
Oh, yay. All right. Well, we'll try and keep on the books. That's the one thing we are going to try and do because there's so much to talk about in the world right now. But Bear, we're in the San Juan Islands in Washington State. We've got a couple of sisters that I really, really like. They've got their mom, who's slightly complicated, still like her too. It's a tighter cast. We're back in the States. You know, obviously we were off the Kamchatka Peninsula. But when did you start working on Bear? Because I thought there was a different book coming between Disappearing Earth and what I'm now reading.
Really? Oh, wait, I want to hear about what you thought was the different book coming, if we talked about it or if...
I'm piecing it together from something you said to someone else. And it sounds like you had a draft where you're like, this is not going to happen. I mean, thematically, It probably is related to what I got to read.
Yes.
But it does sound like it went through maybe a couple of iterations before it became Bear.
Actually, you're so spot on and also brilliant. And I would expect no less from like Miwa Messer, queen of books. You're incredible. When I sold Disappearing Earth in 2017, and right away got the brilliant advice, start working on a new project. Started working on a new project, and into that new project, I poured in all my anxiety, all my what's happening, all my confusion about the process, all my, oh my gosh, I want to impress people and be a good writer. And, I like every single thing. That project became like, in the, when you see like a witch in a movie and she's stirring a big cauldron and it's like green and it's bubbling and it has like eyeballs floating on the top. This was that project. It was just like a powerful feat of insecurities, anxieties, and fear, kind of like gently veneered with a character and a situation. That project, thank goodness, after a while had to be set aside. And it was a great thing. People talk about like the anxiety of the sophomore novel. Got to put it into that. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what people like. I don't know how to impress people. I don't know what's going on. So I want to write something that is so much fun to me, something that feels like such an immersive escape, that feels thrilling to enter, that feels wild. I'm going to have a bear in this story, talk about wild, and I'm going to do something that you said I really like these sisters. I really like these sisters. I really like this world. I had so much fun every single day working on it. It came faster and cleaner and more thrillingly than any writing I've ever done before. And the feeling was like, let's go. Like, let's just go into this. And it was exhilarating. And so then this book came out of that feeling. And it was fabulous. I started it in fall 2021. Mm-hmm. And we finished like all edits in, I guess, end of summer 2023, which for me is like breakneck pace.
That's crazy fast.
It was so fast. It was so fast. Never happened before. And it might be the only time it'll ever happen in my life, I think.
We'll see. But the voice in this book, right? You're doing a close third. Two sisters, Sam and Elena. And the voice is so good. It's so sticky in all the right ways, right? Like the sisters are approaching lots of things differently, but we're also watching them break apart. And they're only 13 months apart, which is tricky when you're a kid, right? Like you're used to being really close to your sibling and having the same world and everything. And this is a huge break for them.
Yes.
And I think we kind of have to talk about the title a little bit.
We got to talk about the title.
Okay. The Bear is not the television. We're not talking about the streaming series. We are, in fact, talking about a four-legged hairy thing that does not smell particularly good, according to
No.
you in this book. It's a little Grimm's fairy tale-ish.
It's a little, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotta
Yes.
talk about the bear. How did we get a bear in this book?
Exactly what you said, Little Grimm's Fairy Tale. What went into the writing of this book, or what inspired the writing of the book for me, was a feeling of, like I said, this feeling of like being at the end of my creative rope and feeling like, well, what happens now if I just like let go of all the things I'm afraid of and try to do something very, very, very influential on this book, is the feeling of being stuck and of sort of being trapped. It's no coincidence that this started in 2021 after a very trapped experience that we all shared and had different versions of. But 2020 was, I don't think I'm alone in saying, like, not a great experience on my end. Another huge, root of this project that is very explicit, is not a feeling, but is like a direct text or an inspiration, is this Grimm's fairy tale that I was obsessed with as a kid, called Snow White and Rose Red. And that story is about these two sisters who live with their mother, and a bear knocks on their door. They hear a knock on their door. It's a bear. The bear speaks to them, says, "Can I come in?" They like roll around on the floor with this bear and are very into this bear. And it turns out the bear is enchanted in this fairy tale. The fairy tale is structurally, to me, never made sense. It doesn't have an arc that I could track.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have, it doesn't build for me in the way that it doesn't sort of like pursue the most interesting things that I thought it might pursue. And maybe because of that subversion of my expectations, or I think primarily because of these bizarre elements, I was really obsessed with this fairy tale when I was growing up. I would try to write different versions of it. I could never kind of get my teeth into it. I couldn't figure out how to make it work or make it make sense. But it was always there, this idea of these two sisters and this bear. And when I got to the end of this rope, when I was feeling so stuck, I thought, if I give myself the freedom to do what I want, what do I want to do? I'm obsessed with this story. I'm obsessed with this situation. I'm obsessed with this animal. And I want to see what would happen when a bear comes to your door. The bear, it was never going to be a tiger or an elephant or anything else. Like, it had to be, for this book, the bear, and it had to be these sisters, and it had to be this door. But structurally, it's a totally different story.
I also, as a city person, would personally never like to see a bear anywhere near me. Thanks. Out. This is as close as I'm going to get. And I mean, at one point, the bear is literally on their doorstep. And watching Sam and Elena figure it out, they do not have a great track with people outside of their immediate family, right? It is so clearly a triangle between mom and the two girls.
Yeah.
And mom has had better days. She's sick. The girls are adults. But this is a really financially precarious family.
Yes.
And everyone's cobbling. Mom can't really work anymore. The girls are cobbling together, and they're trying to pay the mortgage, and they're buying groceries, and sometimes the power goes off because you can't pay the bill. So they're already living sort of on the edges. But it's also made clear that, at one point social services appeared, and it was not a great experience for the girls. So the bear shows up, and their first thought is, well, we're not going to call anyone.
Yeah, their experiences with authority have been really negative, really, really negative.
Yeah, but the isolation, right? And especially when I think about Disappearing Earth, right? And how you're writing about community and the impact of these two little girls going missing on a community, right? It's a really stark contrast. These two sisters and their mom, they're just like, it's just us. And sometimes the sisters are like, well, mom means well, but she's over there. Yeah. It really is these two girls. It's a little claustrophobic and yet not.
Yes. Yes. Yes, which I think is their experience. Yeah.
Well, and that's okay. So it is their experience. And I know you just talked about the influence of the fairy tale, but you've created a really tight world that is really different from your first book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you know that that's what was going to happen? I mean, you've also talked about the fact that it changed, it evolved. This is a really different book from when you started out, but I kind of feel like there's no other way to tell this particular story.
I also feel that there's no other way. I'm so glad that you feel that way because that's how I feel. And what the second book, quote unquote, that I thought I would write was not this, but the once this story began, it could only be this way. It like once it kicked in, this was the story. Although, of course it like had to get majorly replotted and revised and, throw out 2/3 of it and start over. But still, it was always this core. I guess never say always, but right now I can never see myself moving away from certain obsessions I have in work. And I think those obsessions are around womanhood and around violence or like survivorship and around community connection. What does surviving look like when we're with other people? Like, what does experience of violence look like in community? What these questions to me propel my writing forward, propel a story forward. And I think the thesis of Disappearing Earth to me was like community can save us, connection can save us. I think the thesis of this book is in a way like the flip side of that coin, that disconnection can destroy us. It's about these sisters, but specifically about this main character. Sam is extraordinarily, and as time goes on, like mostly by choice, isolated. She is really mistrustful, has had really difficult experiences, and felt abandoned in those experiences, and felt that her interactions with systems, interactions with outsiders, interactions with strangers have been so negative for her that she is completely like choosing to isolate herself. And then in that isolation, what happens? I think where she has been pushed to by the world or where she's chosen to be, it makes sense to me that that's where she has landed. Like that in reaction to what she's experienced, she's gone to this isolated place. And then what happens? What happens then when you're in that place? What happens to her when she's made a choice to trust no one? Then what do you do?
She's also working a service job in a community that's run by tourist dollars. And so when everything shuts down because of COVID, she's out of a job. And so their precarious financial situation becomes even more precarious because she has no income. And we're at a point where she's finally sort of making up some ground. Sam's dreaming of escaping, even though she's the one who's chosen to isolate. She's also thinking, well, there's something different. There's something, the grass, it is greener. I would like to be there, but I can't leave yet because frankly, I don't have the money to do it. But I want to talk about the San Juan Islands for a second, because by all accounts, beautiful place, by all accounts, totally driven by tourist dollars. And we don't always think about the folks who live there year round doing the work.
Yeah, I always want to talk about the San Juan Islands. I always want to talk about like the tourist economy. I think is a very fascinating extreme end of the range, or maybe not extreme, but like really visible way to see the division certainly in this country, but maybe in the world, like between haves and have-nots, so to speak, or between like the folks who can vacation and the folks who are supporting the vacation, and like the folks who are living the fantasy and the folks who are making that fantasy happen for them. That's a really stark difference of lived experience. And I think often on an island like this, or the fantasy then becomes dominant, and thinking of or seeing the people who are propping up that fantasy and making it happen kind of punctures the dream. So you want to think of it as a place that is, you being, the vacationer, like you want to think of it as this paradise, and you don't want to think of the gears and the pulleys and the bills that need to be paid and the struggle of making that paradise happen. Just to plug a book, Wait by Gabriella Burnham just came out, that it's set on Nantucket, and it's so explicitly about like, this relationship, this class relationship between people who, it's set on Nantucket, and it's about people who live there and people who visit there and what that is like. It's beautiful. I'm always plugging books.
Yeah,
I'm sure you never plug a book, Miwa.
About that. But I love the idea that we can talk about the things that ail us as a culture and a society and do it without ever losing the humanity. Like, I'm always very clear when I'm in the narrative of Bear, I'm always very clear that Sam and Elena do not have stuff figured out, but I want to hang out with them and I am rooting for them. Oh man, I was rooting for them. And, you know, Sam's prickly. She's got some anger. We might say rage.
Yeah.
You know, boiling in the back of her brain. And it's not to say that people haven't reached out to her and tried to steer her in a direction.
Yeah.
But when you don't have anything to model off of, right? Like if you don't know what your actual options are, how are you going to figure it out? Like,
yeah,
she's excited when she gets time and a half.
Yeah, as she should be. That's exciting. But yeah, that's what she looks forward to for sure. That's the peak for her. Yeah.
When did you know that you had the girls as we know them, though? Because they are really great characters. They are decidedly their own people, as readers will discover. But, you know, it's not like you have a sister. I know you have a sibling. You have a brother, but like, and of course you're a writer. You can make stuff up, but you really write sisters well, and you do it in Disappearing Earth. And I'm not saying you have to have a sister to write about a sister, but I want to talk about that relationship and what you as the author get out of that.
I get so much out of it. I love that relationship. And I think to me, especially like they're now, 28 and 29, these sisters, Sam and Elena, they're adults, although they're still very much living the lives they lived as girls in a way. I mean, they're in their childhood home. They're caring for their mother. The roles have changed, and the older sister has taken on responsibility for the household. And I think Sam still feels like any moment now I'm going to grow up and my grown up life is going to begin. But they are like fully adults who've been living their adult lives for a decade now. In that adult relationship, they're sisters, and they're also best friends. That best friend relationship to me is one in my own life that I don't have a sister, but I feel very passionate about my friendships, and my friendships with women specifically. And that like passionate, absorbing, loving friendship, I think is one I really try to put in the text. And when I thought about Sam's character, Sam emerged very fully formed for me. She is, I often that happens when someone has a lot of overlap with me, I would say, they kind of hatch out. And I would say there are two sort of emotional sources for what was going into her. One is that best friend element. She is a best friend with a fierce loyalty, which is a kind of experience of friendship to me, is like a bittersweet experience of friendship. When you have a friend who's like, you're my number one, I'm totally committed to this. And then there's a feeling of that, of like, and aren't you as committed? And aren't you, there's like a covetousness or a determination, and almost, if it sours, a kind of threat in that loyalty. Like, I am dedicated to you. I'm dedicated to you. Like, you also need to be so dedicated. I think Sam has a lot of that. And that is an experience of emotional intensity that I really wanted her to have and channel. And I don't think she's alone in the world because certainly like I've had those experiences, She also has another emotional source for her is from that sister relationship. And this is one that I think is very overlapping with my own experience. I have, as you said, I have a sibling, I have a brother who is older than me, he's 4 years older than me. There's a dynamic that I have with my brother, or certainly had with my brother growing up, that Sam and Elena have, which is that the older sibling is better socialized. The older sibling knows how to talk to people. The older sibling like does the polite thing, or doesn't blurt stuff out, or like is a little more under control, sort of because of necessity to be, but like the older sibling sort of seems to have it more together. And so as the younger sibling, you think, well, I can do whatever I want. You know what I mean? Like, well, if they're going to be good, then I get to be whatever. If they are polite, then I have the space to be rude. Or if they are controlled, I get the space to be unbridled. And you kind of relish in that freedom and that babyhood, and you get a little bit of a longer leash to do it because someone else is picking up the, social slack. And you can be a little more unacceptable because they're being so acceptable. I mean, Miwa, do you have siblings?
I have a little brother.
Okay, older sister responsibility. Is this your experience at all?
I was just waiting for you to get to the point where I was like, oh yeah, okay. I mean, I have my moments of being feral. Please don't misunderstand me. It's not like he was alone in that, but yeah, there is an expectation of the older child that somehow you will know how to not burn things to the ground. Right. Or at least that's how it was in our house. I think he had slightly more freedom of movement than I did. Also, in some ways, because boy.
Yes.
And, this is a million years ago. So raised by wolves, boy child, whatever. There was some latitude there. So listening to you talk, though, about Sam's sort of showing up on the planet and of the book and whatnot, you're writing a lot about power in a way that I think women like Sam and Elena don't necessarily have the words for it because they don't have the experience of it, right? Their lives are very, very prescribed. Right. Yeah. They go to work, they come home, they go for a walk, whatever. I mean,
yes,
they have one car between all of them. And, sometimes Elena has to walk and she'll say, well, no, I'll get a ride from someone. But to have your movements dictated by your resources is something that I think a lot of people are familiar with, but then you don't have the language to say, well, this is garbage, or how do we, I mean, at one point the girls are saying, well, if only we had the money, we can go off together.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I love my brother, but I would like to not live with him.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
But in their world, it makes perfect sense that this is how they would think, because how would they know differently? I mean, the house they live in is the house that was their grandmother's first, right? Yes. Their mother grew up in a house. So I grew up in a community where people lived down the street from their grandparents, and I'm walking around going, wow, okay. Yeah. I thought everyone, got on a plane to visit their grandparents and crossed an ocean. I had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. As none of us do. I think we're all in our paradigm becomes dominant for us, like the experience that we have. We think like this is life, right? This is normal.
But part of Paradise Lost too is having your relationships change. Right? Yes. It's not just the terrain, it's not just the finances, it's not just the work. Yes. It's also watching your relationships change because of what all of that means. And it really is.
Yes.
It's a pile, it's expensive to be poor. It's a pile on.
Yes.
And then all of the fees and the things you can't do because you don't have a bank account and all of this. And I mean, you and I were talking about Matt Desmond's Evicted before we started taping.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, if you haven't yet, please pick up Poverty by America, which was his last book. But Sam and Elena are not stand-ins for polemics, right? Like, they are fully formed women whose circumstance has given them lives.
Yes.
That a lot of people can understand.
Yeah.
And hopefully the ones who have not experienced it can also come to the table. I mean, I'm also just thinking of, Maid.
Yeah.
Stephanie Land's memoir.
Which I read when I was working on this,
Okay. So let's talk about influences for a second, because, you can't really separate the art from the reality, right? Like, our art reflects where we are as a culture and a society. And and even though we were in Kamchatka for Disappearing Earth, I mean, violence against girls and women, disappearing girls and women, indigenous women being far more endangered in some cases and not getting any attention. Like, all of these things they're concepts that we understand as human beings. Yeah. Yeah. But I think you are pulling from lots of different places and lots of different voices.
I hope so. I try to. To me, that's the joy and the task is to somehow it's become that making up a story is the best way I know to understand what is going on. Understand what is in my own life, understand what is in the world, understand this thing I love, but don't know, and I want to know it. and try to make up a story, make up characters, put them inside that, and through that try to come to know. And certainly the experiences of Sam and Elena in this book, or the experiences of the many characters in Disappearing Earth in my first book, were ways for me to try to understand or try to live inside an experience through fiction that I wanted to like process. You talked about, you used the word precarious, for example, for Sam and Elena before, and I think precarious is exactly the right word to describe their financial situation. They're in that space that where they are not qualifying for supports. Their family is like not able to access services. They're sort of above that they've cleared that bar, but it's always then wavering. For every one step forward, it's two steps back. Like they can't access more stability. They can't figure it out. And they feel very, very alone in this. And I think I'll say, like, speaking from New York City, from a very, very different economic landscape and class landscape around me, that precarity and aloneness and lack of support, I don't think is specific to one income band at all. I think all of us are afraid because there's such little social support or such insufficient social support. And if all of us are like one trip to the hospital away from devastation at any moment, family.
And for Sam, her fear and her anger are wrapped up in the same place. And I don't think she understands where the line could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to go back to influence for a second because I'm thinking about
totally.
Louise Erdrich and the way you do the voices. Yeah. Okay, the way you do the voices in Disappearing Earth. Yeah. Each chapter is narrated. Do we want to call Disappearing Earth a novel and stories? I don't think we do. I've seen people refer to it that way. I'm just like, it's a novel with a bunch of narrators. It doesn't, like, why are we trying to put labels on everything? Why? And this happens to you quite a lot too, which is why I want to bring in the influences, because I think it's kind of fascinating, all the places you're pulling from. But, I've also seen people say, well, she writes crime novels. And I'm like, not really. I don't know. I'm okay with a great story well told. I don't need to put a label on it. I really like it when the sentences really swing and the characters are great. Like, if something happens on top of it, that's fine. But
I always called Disappearing Earth a novel and stories while I was working on it. That's like, to me, what a name of it is. And then really, in a really silly, I went to a summer writing conference, and there was an editor there who was speaking, and he was very declarative.
Okay.
This was like our big opportunity to see an editor speak. Yeah. And he was like, there's no such thing as a novel and stories. It doesn't exist. Either it's a novel or it's just a short story collection. And I went back to my room and I said, delete. And I said, Disappearing Earth, a novel. And I think it is. I think it's more of a novel than it is. If a novel and stories is not a label that we give things, then I think a novel is what it is. But it definitely is a novel in many pieces. It's constructed. It's a puzzle that has many pieces that you put together to get the whole story. And that is absolutely that. I also have a fantasy of being a literary thriller writer, and I'm always chasing that genre goal.
Literary thrillers can exist without a doubt. I mean, you go back to John le Carré, right? Or Lauren Wilkinson in An American Spy.
Obsessed.
It can be totally done. But I mean, the sort of Greek chorus of voices in Disappearing Earth, it's not quite the correct metaphor, but like all of the women that we meet who are narrating that book.
Yeah.
All of the things they reveal, all of the things they hold back, and people forget that when they hold back, they also reveal stuff, right?
Yes, totally.
So we've got Louise obviously there.
Obsessed.
But I want to talk like general literary influences before we come to like specific literary influences for The Bear, because there is something you read for this that it just delights me that you did. But I just constructing you as Julia Phillips novelist, Little Alice Munro, maybe?
A lot of Alice Munro. Okay. Yeah. So obsessed. The inimitable, I think, greatest American writer, Louise. I just think she's the best there is. These days, a lot of Miriam, I'm going to embarrass myself now with what I'm going to say. Taves? Miriam
Taves, I
Taves?
think, yeah.
Miriam Taves. Growing up, a lot of Barbara Kingsolver. Went away from a little bit in college because she wasn't on my syllabuses. And then once I realized I don't have to read by the syllabus, then came back and I thought this person is an absolute genius. Absolute genius. And I confess, I'm talking about right now who my favorite writers are, but growing up was a lot of books I felt I ought to read. So that's like the Philip Roth and the John Updike and sort of like mid 20th century books that my dad gave me, John Cheever. And then the books that a lot of children's literature that I like loved to read and felt a little bit naughty about, like a lot of Roald Dahl, a lot of fairy tales, a lot of books that sort of touched into the fantastical or the perverse or in a different way than these, Portnoy's Complaint did, which also touches into the perverse. And that thrilled me. And I think what emerged out of that was certainly love a sentence, certainly love a character, and also can't get enough of an exciting situation. I love a situation. I love a plot. And I'm always
like
chasing
stakes.
that.
You like,
like
stakes. And I respect that choice, but you like to have stakes. You like to have skin in the game.
Yes, I like something that matters from the beginning to the end too, that is unifying. Who knows how successfully that is happening on the page, but that is my reading taste, without a doubt. Yes.
But it's funny hearing you bring up Roth and Updike and Cheever. I was actually talking about the three of them last night with a pal for various and sundry reasons. But of all of them, Cheever is the one who holds the best.
Yeah.
And, I read a lot of Updike when I was young because he was in the air. He was everywhere.
His sun was like high in the sky. I feel like totally.
And Roth, I went back and forth on a lot. And Cheever, though, there's sort of a classicism to the language and the writing and the sentences. And the swimmer still holds up, and that story is just wild. That story is totally wild, and he pulls it off. But dipping back into the collected stories like that, and the thing is huge.
Yeah.
You can slide in anywhere, and I don't think there's a dog in the collection. I can't even remember how many stories. It's like 35 stories or something. We don't even do that kind of thing anymore, really.
Yes, totally.
And it's wild because they're all spot on, but they're all different.
Yes.
And yet, if it's a Cheever story, it's going to be really satisfying. There were a couple of later novels where I was like, okay, I'm not going to revisit you. But like Wapshaw, the first Wapshaw still, it feels like a field guide to a certain kind of Massachusetts.
Oh my God, I love it.
Updike and Cheever in general, it's like, this is a handbook for understanding the world that I am currently plopped into. Okay.
That was Roth for me, writing about Newark in like the 1950s. And there I was growing up in, neighboring Essex County, New Jersey. And I thought, oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
But I love the idea of books as sort of guideposts, right? We're talking about fiction like it's kind of a travel guide. And I love that. I absolutely love that. I will probably not be in the San Juan Islands anytime soon. And I promise you, if I see a bear, I will try to remember all of the instructions of what you're supposed to do. Because I would really super like to not see a bear. Thanks very much. Peace out.
You will not see a bear like they see a bear. That would be a very unlikely situation.
That I'm extremely clear on. I'm just talking about occasionally I like to go for a walk in the woods and possums I can handle. Even raccoons, I'm not. They're messy and they're mean. I'm just like, thank you. But the idea that we can use novels as time travel, or that we can use them to explore the stuff that is profoundly uncomfortable in some ways, and in other ways you're just like, wow, I had no idea that was happening.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And the more we can humanize someone's experience that isn't necessarily ours, that's like the way you can play with time and interiority in a novel, right? And you have this close third thing happening in Bear where I'm just like, oh, hi, where have you been? don't misunderstand the voice in Disappearing Earth. And yes, I've talked about it as a chorus of voices, but I mean the overall narrative voice of Disappearing Earth is really kind of hypnotic, and you're like, oh, I need to know more.
Yeah, but for Bear, it's a much closer. It's a very close third. Yeah,
you were in it. It's a much more emotional experience, and I was mad when it was over. I was like, wait, how is this over? Why are we done? And the ending, I will say, there was lots of conversation about the ending in our office. There were many booksellers having conversations about the ending. Like Disappearing Earth, I feel like it's very organic, and there was no other option. Like, this was it. We were always going to get to this moment. And I'm wondering how much you know about endings as you're finishing. I can't remember if you're an outliner or not. I know we've had that conversation at some point, but I feel like you might be as surprised by where you get by the end of these things in a good way. Yeah. Not in a, oh, I had no idea where we were going, but like the endings of your books, you stick the landing every single time.
That means a lot to me. I hope so, because I really value that quality in a read. I love a feeling of when you read a book and it sticks the landing. And sorry, just to jump back, but thinking about fiction, what fiction can do. To me, fiction is, my experience of reading fiction and my draw to fiction is very much about that. Humanized doesn't feel to me like exactly the right word.
Okay.
But like the getting to be inside with someone instead of being outside and watching, or like, to me, my experience of nonfiction, almost all nonfiction, like across an enormous and varied form, is often one of watching or like of observing. And my experience of fiction, and maybe it's just my own sort of mental block, like allowing myself to step in a way that I don't, if I know it's made up, I like let myself step in. But you get to be inside with the person in a way that is just thrilling. And you don't really get that with anybody else. You don't get that in your life. You don't get that, with a friend. You don't get that with a partner. Like, you don't get that with your parents. Like, the degree of intimacy when you're actually within them, walking around with them, hearing their thoughts, is just a different experience and a delicious one.
Especially for art, because you don't necessarily get it. I mean, even with music, right? Even with music, you don't quite get there's always going to be some distance. And same thing with film, right? Like, you're always
watching.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said for sitting in a book and being able to trust the writer too. I mean, listen, plenty of us have not finished books. And I know I keep saying this, but like, really, if you're reading a book and it's not working for you, just put it down. I promise you, there is another book that will make your heart, sing. But I just, when I hear people saying, well, I've got to muscle through, I'm like, actually, you don't. I mean, sometimes I'm the person who muscles through because I'm a bookseller. It's what I do.
I got it. Yeah.
But if you're just, a reader in the world, feel free to not finish a thing, y'all. Just feel free to put it down and pick up a different thing.
Wait, this is something my Updike loving dad told me when I was growing up, who's like, he's the big reader of my childhood. I don't know if this is a general understanding, so I'm going to try this on you and see if this is just something he said, or, this is, again, our paradigms, right? Like, what is common and what is not? He would always say, give a book 100 pages minus your name, minus your age, that is to say. So, like, if I'm 11 years old, I should read 89 pages of a book before deciding whether or not to put it down. But if I'm 99, if the first page doesn't get me, I don't have time to mess around. I'm going to put this book down and move on to the next one. And I thought it was a very sweet rule of thumb: 100 pages minus your age to see how much time you should give it. Yeah, a little silly.
I like it. I do. I think it's charming.
It's charming. Now, how true is it? Who knows?
I think it's true for probably more readers than not. Yeah. Well, you and I first met when I was running the Discover Great New Writers program here. And like, you kind of know it when you see it. I mean, it's such a cliche, but really, like, you know it when you see it. And sometimes that's 2 pages. Sometimes that's a sentence. Sometimes that's like a paragraph in the middle of the book because you just opened it randomly. I mean, You just know when the thing is there. And
I
it's
know.
that sense of discovery that I'm hoping to replicate for people, where it's just like, you know what? This may not be the thing that you think it is, or but I fall in love with ideas really quickly, and I fall in love with voice really quickly. And
I love that.
For me, when I'm reading, I need voice first. And voice to me is sentences and characters and all sort of the nebulous stuff, right? When you don't have a solid sense of the voice, right? Like that's the thing that rips me out of a book very, very quickly. I don't have to like characters. I don't need to trust characters, but I need to be able to say, you know, to be in conversation with the actual narrative voice, right? And narrative voice is not necessarily the same as character and all. But if I'm in it, I'm in it.
Yes.
And that's, for me, that's reading Bear, right? Yeah. I was like, I don't know where we're going yet. I know this bear smells really bad.
Really bad.
And then you give me these markers as I'm going through, and I'm like, oh, I understand who these women are. And I understand what the situation is. And I understand their community.
Yeah.
That's why I read. Right.
That makes me so happy.
That's why I read, because I'm just like, oh, yeah, okay. And granted, stuff happens. Also, it's a very tightly written book. I forget what the page count is, but it's a really
yeah. It's really like it's a little compressed.
282 pages. It's tiny. But you do a lot.
Sliver.
Do you miss this world now that it's done? I mean, I'm sure you're working on the new thing, but
you know, the world is. By the way, I realize that every single question you ask, then I start responding to something that was before the question. And you asked a brilliant question about endings, and I didn't know how to answer it, so I just started talking about something else. Isn't that
well, you want to talk about? I mean, we can talk about endings.
We could talk about endings, but also I want to say I'm going to answer a question that you asked. How about that? Okay. Do I miss this world? This world doesn't feel done for me yet. This is the pleasure, I think, of the moment of publication is, I would say, a high stress one. It's very exciting. But it's pretty intense. and one of the intense things about it is that's good is that I do feel plunged back into the world of the book in a way that it does feel very vivid and fresh and everyday to me. Like getting to talk with you about Sam and Elena and where they live and this bear and the way the bear smells. Like I feel those things all over again, and they don't feel far away or hard to access. They feel very immediate. So I don't feel like I have to miss the world because I have it here. And that's such a pleasure. And I do think like there's so much of them that is Sam's rage and solipsism and is never far from me. I will say that is also a place that I am often visiting. So she feels very immediate to me always, I think.
I do think that we're still having conversations about how to handle women's rage in general, you know, and this whole good girl, bad girl, whatever thing. But I just really like Sam's voice.
Yeah.
I really like her voice. I really like Elena's voice. I love their relationship. I get Mom.
Yeah.
I get Mom. I get her story. I get there's some secondary characters who I get. Like the world just feels really complete to me. But before we go, I'm going to ask you what you were going to say about endings.
oh my gosh. Well, okay. Perfect timing, huh? Well, what was I going to say about endings? I guess only to say that to me, as that what you said before about sticking the landing means a lot to me. Means the most to me, maybe, because to me, the feeling of satisfaction or completion that comes when you read a book and the ending lands in that right place where you think, oh my gosh, like I didn't see this coming, but it could be no other way, is the ideal. And that to me is what I realize like makes me like the book or makes me recommend it to people afterwards, or makes me, it's like that taste that leaves in your mouth kind of. And so I do feel it is so important, and I want to create a feeling that the landing's stuck. we were talking about this before we got on the recording, but I have realized that through the writing and through being lucky enough to have those stories get in readers' hands, being lucky enough to have the books published, is that how I think of the endings. I can't control that experience for people. And for some people it lands, and for some people it doesn't. And for some people it feels just right, and for some people it doesn't. And that itself is provocative and exciting and fascinating to me, because I don't know, maybe this is how chefs think when they're cooking something that's going to leave a taste in someone's mouth, but like you think you know what flavors you're putting in there, and it's something else.
Yeah, but it goes back to that thing you were saying about intimacy, right? And how you can live in a book in a way that you can't, or a relationship in a book in a way you can't anywhere else. It is, I mean, everyone brings themselves to whatever they're reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without a doubt. And I certainly, I mean, I bring myself all the way into a book as I'm reading. But that's kind of the beauty of the thing, right? Like, any given book isn't the same reader to reader. Yeah. And it's a really cool thing if you think about it that way.
It is really cool.
What is this? You're putting it out into the world. And like you said, you can't control people's response to it. But I love the idea that reading Bear for me isn't necessarily the same thing as someone down the block, and I can tell you the conversations we had in the office, like, we were not all
reacting to the same things in the same way.
No. But I love that, because it's like, wait, what book did you read? And I'm like, okay. Or, you stop for a second and you're like, how did I miss that?
Yeah, totally.
But that's
how I feel as the writer. Sometimes someone says something to me about what they saw in the text, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I had no idea that was there. It's so exciting. It's such a gift.
Well, I'm super stoked for readers to meet Sam and Elena and the smelly bear. I know I keep coming back to the smelly bear thing, but I sort of was not expecting how much the bear was going to smell, because again, I would prefer to not hang out with bears. I know they're smart. They can have their terrain. I'm just going to hang out over here on the sidewalk. Thanks very much. I think it's just better for everyone if I'm just, I'm a city person. What can I say? Julia Phillips, it is so good to see you, and I'm delighted that Bear's out in the world. And if you haven't read Disappearing Earth, please go do that too. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mia. Thank you so much, Port Over. Thank you so much, Barnes & Noble. I love this so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you for listening. Port Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.